On BBC Two now, it's happy 30th birthday, Horizon.
We have ignition sequence start.
These are the instruments of change that have given strength to man's arm and speed to his brain, that have allowed him to shape the world in his own image. A great temple to the skills and technical wit of man.
Earth angel, will you be mine? My darling dear, love you all the time. I'm just a fool, a fool in love.
I think if you want to stretch a point, you can say that science is a religion. Obviously, in a lot of ways, science is the antithesis of religion. It demands skepticism. It abhors belief without reason, which is what faith is. But in the sense that it is a belief system. Religions are belief systems. There are a set of rules, a set of ways of understanding the universe, if you like. Science does the same thing. My point would be that science is the real one. Science is the one that actually works. It produces genuine miracles. And that's why I always looked upon Horizon as being the thinking person's songs of praise.
Science is a very strong narrative power, which is often forgotten by people who think that science is about the facts of technology, or the facts of discovery, or the facts of experimentation. Because what empowers science in the most general cultural sense is the notion that it is discovering something new, and this sense of the discovery of the new has within it a notion of progress, a notion of moving from A to B to C to D. This narrative of modernization and progress is absolutely part of the so-called objectivity of science.
This is the Science Museum, London, a great temple to the skills and technical wit of man. These are the instruments of change that have given strength to man's arm and speed to his brain, that have allowed him to shape the world in his own image. No wonder they inspire devotion. For whatever reasons, they're developed out of the European cultural tradition alone, the spirit of rational inquiry, the idea of experimentation, which cut through the fog of witchcraft and magic, and established that nothing on earth or above it was beyond analysis and rational inquiry. And it's this tradition that the world wants from us more than our politics or our religions. The developing world wants our science. The storyteller relates their history, their myths, the rules by which they'll live. She tells it with charm. They'll remember what she says. The storyteller relates their history, their myths, the rules by which they'll live, the rules by which they'll live, the rules by which they'll live, the rules by which they'll live.
What remains for science to do? How will it affect our lives? This is a city of the near future, planned by scientists and designers for the General Motors exhibit at the World's Fair in New York. They see a future where man will be making fuller use of the world's at present untapped resources. Improved technology will make it possible to penetrate jungles and build roads with tools so efficient that from tree cutting with a laser beam to laying road foundations, will be a matter of only a few short hours with equipment like this.
The storyteller relates their myths.
In this world of tomorrow, overland communications will be vital, say the experts at the World's Fair. So superhighways will cross areas which are now served only by cart tracks.
The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic.
Our generation thought you could do anything. There was a period at the end of the war when all the science fiction programs were produced and people imagined everyone would go to work on an individual rocket and you'd have travelators and life would be totally dominated by technology. And in the event, of course, when it happens, people realize there's more to it than that. But of course, the real interest in science has always been it gives humanity, allegedly, control over nature. Knowledge replaces superstition.
We have ignition sequence start. The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Science is a very strong narrative power, which is often forgotten. Cultures depend not on fact, but on storytelling. We've talked about science as a narrative. We've also got to talk about science as image and spectacle.
You did form the impression that in a lot of ways it was done as a spectacular, as a visual spectacular, as a way of America, flexing its corporate and technical and scientific and engineering muscles and saying, "Hey, look at us! This is our sort of phallic thrust out into the universe, to spread man's seed out there. It's going to be good old golf playing boys in the moon seed as well, and not those pesky Russians."
And the thrust looks good. All engines, all sources show the second.
I watched Apollo in Bombay, first in grainy newspaper photographs on the front page of the Times of India, and then in the documentaries that preceded Hollywood movies. And the whole question was, which was the Hollywood movie, the Apollo or the movie that was to follow. But it represented this poetic side of progress. You had this machine, which was now, going up to meet the gods.
This is Apollo 8 coming to you live from the moon. I think that each one of us carries his own impressions of what he's seen today.
Well, I sat at home in the morning with my children and I watched the landing on the moon, and then I looked out of the window and I could see the moon there. And the idea of scientific advance on that scale was absolutely breathtaking. I've never forgotten that when the Russians put a spacecraft on the moon, put a vehicle on the moon, somebody said to me in Bristol, if they can do that, why can't we have a decent bus service in Bristol? Now, it was a very powerful question, really, because it's quite obvious that the military demands were what really shaped the nature of technology. And so there was always at the heart, and always will be at the heart of scientific and technological questions, political and moral choices about how it's to be used.
The poor are caught in vicious circles. Without food, there's disease. With disease, there's lassitude. With lassitude, there's less food. To break the circle, to stop the disease, we need more food.
I think most of us who are actually engaged in agricultural research, either in countries like this or in tropical countries, have believed for a number of years that we have enough information to double or even treble yields, purely technically.
IR8 can treble yields. The implications are enormous, since rice is the principal food in half the world and the poor half at that. Scientifically, the world food problem is soluble, it seems. Man can be fed. The old way of doing things has to be broken down slowly and carefully by hundreds of experts convincing millions of people in thousands of villages. And everywhere the trained expert is needed. It isn't about the glamorous scientific discovery or the splendor of technological achievement, but how to implement those discoveries and achievements. It's about persuading peasants to use new seed, about building roads in the right place and delivering fertilizers on time. It's about governing huge and backward populations. It's about convincing a young mother that the way her mother brought her up is wrong, and convincing sons that their fathers are bad farmers. Only then will the forces of growth begin. Will you get what the economists call the takeoff into sustained growth and prevent the poverty the population explosion threatens. Only then can you unleash the slow but gathering momentum of economic growth and social change. And that change, to begin with at least, will be both tedious and pained.
Science is itself a story of Western cultural development. And in that sense, I think we can see how you had to have the lazy, unproductive native in order to be able to say, look you there, if you use these implements that we give you to use, we've produced them, we'll tell you how to use them, and you'll use them to cultivate both in the way in which we want you to do, but also for our own economic betterment. Then if you don't have the lazy native, then in a sense, the scientific enterprise loses its teeth. It has to have something upon which it can project its superior values.
This traditional background of immense social warmth and support locks a child into an emotionally valuable family life. But it's a closed world, which must discourage all ideas of heresy, of challenge to its fundamental beliefs. It's not a setting designed for the development of the scientific mind, the inquiring mind.
The narrative of that program itself was one where, in order to be able to talk about the values of experimentation and individualism as they are inscribed within Western science, it had to portray those tribal cultures as being group cultures without independence of mind or autonomy of spirit.
These are the instruments of change. It would seem life could hardly be more depersonalized than this. The cozy village relationship of craft apprentice and his master is a long way behind.
Today's world is radically different from yesterday's, and tomorrow's world will be different again. Anthony Wedgwood Benn is a keen and involved observer of this process of technological change. As Minister of Technology, he is concerned with bringing about such changes. Horizon invited him to present a program on the questions that interest him, arising out of the problems he has to deal with as Minister of Technology.
And the argument is a very simple one. It won't be unfamiliar to anybody. It is that technology is power, and that's the only way you can really look at it. It's power, and it's increasing very rapidly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always think of this century, the growth of power. Beginning of the century, train could travel 60 miles an hour. Now spacecraft at 25,000 miles an hour. Largest audience you could address was through a megaphone. Now you could address virtually the population of the world. The quickest number of calculations was with an abacus. Now a computer can make millions of calculations in a microsecond. And then the largest number of people you could kill was with a Maxim machine gun. Now you can kill hundreds of millions of people. And this has created power structures that in a sense have outdated all our institutions of control. And how you get control of these new power centers is the central political question of the century and of the next century.
And even more important for political purposes, of course, this is the expectation gap. It's one thing to be poor when everybody else is poor. It's another thing to be poor when you know that, of course, it is no longer necessary for people to be poor. And this is a major political, new political feature introduced by the development of technology.
When I was first invited to do that Horizon program in 1968, thinking about this and the growth of multinational companies and defense budgets and comparing them to the budgets of nation states, I also was hard at work thinking about how you could bring power closer to people so they could determine for themselves how it was used. And the more I've thought about that, the more relevant I think that analysis was.
She said, "What is his story?" And he said, "His story is an angel being blown backwards into the future." He said his story is a pile of debris, and the angel wants to go back and fix things, to repair the things that have been broken. But there is a storm blowing from paradise, and the storm keeps blowing the angel backwards into the future. And this storm is called progress.
For the past 15 years, Professor Milgram has been studying the nature of obedience.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of civilians at My Lai, or the destruction of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, I don't think of these as impersonal historical happenings. Rather, I see them as real events mediated by human beings just like you and me. How is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, while courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? The main idea would be to create a situation in which a person was told to act with increasing severity against another individual, and to see when he would turn to the experimenter and say, "No, I won't do this anymore." First, you are greeted by a man in a gray technician's coat. He says it's to test whether the use of punishment improves the ability to learn. Now you see the learner strapped into a chair, and electrodes are placed on his wrist. The experimenter says when he makes a mistake in the lesson, his punishment will be an electric shock.
Oh, sad. Sad. Face, music, clown, girl. Correct. Next one, short. Sentence, movie, skirt, time. Answer, please. Wrong. Under 65 volts. Time.
Let me out!
That guy's howling in there.
Continue, please. Go on.
Well, there's a lot of them here, you know. You'll have a heart condition there. You want me to go?
Just continue, please.
It's interesting that although this man continuously objects to the experimenter, he continues to obey. So he's saying one thing, but his behavior is quite another thing. The two are not joined. His laughter, the laughter doesn't mean that the subject is enjoying what he's doing. Rather, it's the expression of deeply experienced anxiety, of nervous tension. Soldiers have been known to burst into laughter before going into battle.
Oh, man.
Continue, please.
Green. Grass, hat, ink, apple. Answer, please.
Go on with the procedure, please, teacher.
315 volts. The answer is ink. Next one.
I refuse to answer.
Well, you gotta keep getting a shock if you don't answer.
Market researchers will go to almost incredible lengths to investigate what people really think, as opposed to what they think they think. Advertising has its own laboratories. The apparatus and techniques were first developed by experimental psychologists. Now, the market research men have taken them over.
If you'd just like to look through this eyepiece here, just against the sponge, and look through into the box.
Under emotional stimulus, the pupil of the eye expands and contracts. A special eye camera records the changes in the hope of learning what people really feel about the pictures they're looking at.
Are you ready?
What can the scientists do? Are they gods, or are they, like the hungry peasants, pawns in a wider game?
Just continue, please.
The researchers know that time is running out, because the diseases are evolving rapidly. If they can't persuade the farmers to change to newer varieties, their crops could face the sort of massive rust attack which hit the headlines during the first Green Revolution. All the scientists can offer is another high-yielding variety, and that can't change the economic factors.
The problem is that Western science, which believes so much in facts, also has its own myths, which it doesn't fully comprehend. Because, you know, the promise of science to the third world has always been that it is for the common man and that it will lead to a further sense of democracy within the society. That is not what happens, because although scientific technologies and scientific ideas can be absorbed, they can be partially absorbed into a social structure which will continue and carry on with its own inequalities.
In the village of Marmi, in the Pabna district, Ahad Ali Sheikh cannot irrigate his land. So some years ago, he welcomed the introduction of wheat because it grew well in the dry winter season. He used to have over 3 acres. Now he has less than 1, and he's desperate to increase his yield.
One of the characteristics of the high-yielding varieties is that they increase the risk to the farmer. The reason for this is that the varieties depend for their success on the use of agricultural chemicals, notably fertilizer, but also pesticides and herbicides. Now, if a small farmer does in fact adopt the technology and borrows money to purchase fertilizer and other agricultural chemicals, he then runs a great risk that if the harvest should fail, not only does he not have an income that year, but he may be forced to mortgage or to sell his land in order to pay off his indebtedness to the moneylender.
So while multinational companies profit from the sale of more chemicals, Ali loses more of his land. This year he spent 50% of the proceeds of selling his wheat on buying rice seeds and fertilizer. And he's never going to achieve the yields promised by the scientists because he can't afford even half the amount of fertilizer they recommend.
The old way of doing things has to be broken down slowly and carefully by hundreds of experts convincing millions of people in thousands of villages. And everywhere the trained expert is needed. It's about convincing a young mother that the way her mother brought her up is wrong, and convincing sons that their fathers are bad farmers.
The promise of science has always been that it is for the common man.
200 men will be redundant when these furnaces close down for the last time. These men accept the need for change, but inevitably they'll lose their personal responsibility for the steel, and top melters like Willie Wilson feel they're on the defensive.
It's through years and years of practice that you get these skills.
It's easy to see why open-hearth steelmaking is outdated. It's a bit too much like an art. The way the metal pours, the colour, the texture, all information to the experienced eye.
As far as
yes, as if it was yesterday.
No, I know I'm quite good at that.
Hard work.
Different ways of telling you.
Small pay.
Well, the management don't know.
The deal offered by new technology then goes like this. Skilled men lose much of the power and status that the skilled gave them. In return, the machine takes on some of the hard work as well.
To be quite honest, I think we're going to lose a lot of our skills, you know, because we're not going to have the same opportunity. The likes of this type of steel making. But when you're going to be computerised, they're going to tell you what to do. This is where it might be a wee bit boring to us. I know this, and these are things of the future.
The last human decision is taken here. A bell rings every 80 seconds, and the man has to decide whether to press a button or not. If he does, the next slab comes out of the furnace and is sent off down the line. From then on, unless something goes wrong, the men in the other control pulpits perched high above the steel just sit back and watch. The layout has been perfected by ergonomists, experts in the man-machine relationship. They've even thought of providing tropical fish tanks to give the operators something fascinating to look at. One problem is isolation. An intercom is a poor substitute for a chat with your mates. And a fish tank is cool company for a sociable man.
To me, the old way of making steel was more interesting. This pressing the button and the computer telling you what to do. Well, sometimes it was telling you to do things you knew you didn't need to do. You just overrode the computer. I mean, there were people putting programs into a computer. And as far as I was concerned, they never knew as much about steel making as what the practical man did. New technology is all right in one way, but it's bad in another. Actually, within months of the new plant opening, we were working with half the men, half the number of furnaces, but we tripled our production. But these men that were knocked idle, they're still idle to this day.
In January 1974, the three-day week started. Power cuts were imposed, and things ground almost to a halt.
The government is not going to break stage 3 of its prices and incomes policy.
We had our jobs stolen from us, kicked on the scrap heap, but nobody ever turned around and took our part.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. Please continue. The next word is white.
But you think you should look in on him, please?
Not once we've started the experiment.
But what if something's happened to the man having attacked or something like that?
The experiment requires that we continue. Go on, please.
Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must...
But he might be dead in there. I mean, some people can't take the shot, sir.
I mean, the view that Wilson took when he made his great speech about the white heat of technological revolution was very simple, never interpreted properly at the time. He said that scientific change will burn us up with unemployment unless we plan it. That's what he meant by the white heat. It wasn't that he was going to put on a white coat and go around with a blowtorch and improve the technical infrastructure. What he was warning us of, and he was absolutely right because we've seen it happen since, that if you don't plan technical change, then you're burned up by unemployment and all the after effects and side effects of technology.
Herman Kahn, 22 stone with a reputed IQ of 200, with little doubt the world's most substantial futurologist. He takes a sweeping long-term view, easily disposing of the current oil crisis, constantly reiterating optimism with the journalists that surround him. When it comes to the long-term future, Khan sees the 21st century as one where 90% of the world could be enormously rich. Each family might well receive £10,000 a year at current purchasing power. He lectures repeatedly on this theme.
I would guess in 100, and certainly less than 200 years, if things go at all well, 95% of the world's people will be living at higher than current American standards of living. Sometimes I'm a little hard to understand, mainly because I swallow my words and don't finish my sentences. But if you can't tell what's coming, you're very dull indeed.
It's the old ways that'll guide conduct, and it's the old men who know them. Their opinion is law at this level. Do you perhaps learn to accept too easily the word of authority?
I think the role of the expert has been to flim-flam people a lot of the time, and I think a lot of people have actually made a lot of money out of very serious-sounding pronouncements that have turned out to be complete balderdash. There's still institutes where people give seminars and tell business people what they already know in snappy Americanese. I wouldn't sort of say Harry's particularly guilty of of deifying the expert. I think obviously you have to have talking heads. Here I'm I'm sort of doing this. I'm sort of putting my sort of 10 pence worth in here. As a sort of skiffy right or whatever. But I mean, at least I don't have an institute to support. So I'm not actually asking for that enormous a fee.
In fact, Khan sees the world of the future as something like that of Westchester County, where he has his home. Whether it's in the hills of Korea or the mudflats of the Amazon, man can create this world for everyone.
Oh, I think the priesthood of technology, sort of at one end almost technological fascism. If you don't understand what I understand, you're not even entitled to ask any questions. If you haven't got a PhD in economics, please don't talk about why you're unemployed, because only we know.
Go on, teacher.
Here, 375 volts.
And we saw on the experiment how frequently subjects turned to the experimenter saying, "Am I responsible?" And as soon as he said they were not, they could proceed more easily. Even if the conflict between conscience and duty gives rise to strain, there are psychological mechanisms that come into play that help alleviate this strain. For example, some subjects comply only minimally. They touch the switch of the generator very lightly, and they have the feeling that this really shows that they're good people, while in fact they're obeying.
As the voltage goes through the tiny circuits, they become lighter. Immensely slowed down, this is a microchip at work, an artificial brain thinking. The rectangle in the middle is the integrated circuit itself, a multitude of transistors a few millimeters across. The lines running to the edge of the screen are contacts to the outside world from an amazingly tiny world.
Such chips will totally revolutionize our way of life.
It's a remarkable society we live in today. I mean, it's no surprise we're in an information revolution, and unlike the Industrial Revolution, where power accrued to those who can manipulate material objects, in this revolution, power is going to accrue to those who can manipulate information. And it's just remarkable already what kind of information is around us.
The fibers now used in communications are amazingly fine, like the diameter of a shell.
In the battle to control the super electronic highway of the future,
Information explosion is now possible.
behind the battle, Titan's radical telescopic vision.
The new Bell Atlantic will be developing new networks and new services that can be exported around the world. I don't know a single industry in the United States today that kind of power exists or doesn't.
The information explosion is now upon us.
Electric pulses being directed by switches. By sending the pulses along different channels, a chip can be made to do anything from arithmetic to reading a book.
これは今テクノポリス例えば筑波屋の学園都市という移転の構想もございます。
Because, you know, the promise of science has always been that it is for the common man.
In this revolution, power is going to accrue to those who can manipulate information.
Computer, any messages?
Hello, Alan. Yes. Sarah called. Michael Childs from Big Time Industries called. No message. Your bank manager called.
I think that computers were empowering a few people, and I wanted to be one of those people. That's why I wanted to be a professional computer scientist, because I wanted to be able to harness that and not be left out of it.
Computer, call Sarah.
Dialing.
Being able to get to information will definitely separate the haves and have-nots. Can you get to that information or can't you? You already see that now in the communities I work in, which are in universities. Those who have access to information and those who don't.
Knowledge is power, and science, particularly when applied in the technological field, creates power. I mean, you could use computers, for example, to keep a dossier of everybody who has dangerous ideas. Or you can have a computer that allows you to know which old age pensioner is likely to die of hypothermia. You can use all technology for different purposes. The question is, what is the purpose? And that is a political and not a scientific question.
And here's the system in action.
And the step liners.
The sausage dog is to make a sort of siphon.
In this British Telecom demonstration, one tiny fibre carries 4 different television channels on 4 separate wavelengths at once. Theoretically, it could be 50,000 channels. With all these new light systems, the information explosion is now upon us.
The main purpose of Challenger's flight was to place in orbit India's own multi-purpose communication satellite, INSAT-1B.
We're ready to deploy it.
INSAT's position is geostationary, its speed of orbit exactly matching the Earth's rotation, so that it's always above the heart of India. Television has opened a window on a wider world, but what impact will it have on village life? Will the new communication technologies bring benefits or blight?
You do need something that will enable you to reach out to people. The remotest areas, the poorest sections of the people.
Television programs also introduce them to a strange new world.
Rich, creamy milkmaid. You can do wonders with it. Try eggless cake. So simple to make.
Manikonda has become part of the global village, and in so doing, has joined the Consumer Society.
Look for the exciting recipes on the milkmaid label.
Who has the cultural expertise to read the images which are being beamed? Who actually produces most of the material that is then sent to the village? So is it really a global village, or is it yet again a kind of imperial venture made much more palatable.
Our people also need to know about the unity of the country, the diversity of the country, things which will help to keep them together and give
There
them
will be further concentration of political power in the hands of the urban elite as the satellite programs start reaching out to the people. There will be an effort made to condition people's minds around individuals, around parties, around leaders, and around an elitist order.
Science has always been embroiled in politics. So, of course, it is going to be used by politicians for their own ends, by economists for their own ends, by media moguls. I mean, the space program was primarily used as a kind of rallying cry for the United States, a way of unifying the nation.
So we are nearing the completion of our joint mission.
INSAT has already proved uniquely successful in taking central government to the people. The question being asked now is, can it be made to work the other way and carry the voice of the people back to the capital?
We are looking forward to having you back in India.
Thank you,
And give them a sense of national oneness.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the
Reach out to people. We can do that through space.
Be the most historic telephone call ever made.
And give them a sense of national oneness.
Welcome to the universe of information. There is an infinite amount of it, which sometimes makes it difficult to comprehend.
Once upon a time, there will be a little girl called Uncumber.
Big splashy color explosions when they made contact.
The software was seriously screwing up and he was trapped inside it, going around
cyberspace, a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators in every nation.
Governments are suddenly waking up to the notion that these networks are available to people, just ordinary people. So there's this fear. For example, the Chinese at the moment are really scared about the fact that their people can communicate with the outside world, get information which they can't control. In the United States, the government wants to have a back door to all encryption chips that are working on the network so they can break in and monitor what's going on. Because this is really scary. People communicating on a mass scale. There's over 20 million people on internet.
The global village may well come to pass, but we're all going to be serfs, and the lords of the manor are going to be people like Rupert Murdoch and Signor Berlusconi. A prospect that fills me with horror, I have to say. Of course, potentially it could empower everyone, yes, but that kind of rather naively assumes that the people with power and people with clout, commercial clout, are somehow sort of going to give up and say, yes, we've got the technology, we could control it all, we could make vast amounts of money out of it, actually, but no, you have it, oh yeah, that'll be right, So potentially, yes, it's the usual thing with science, with technological developments. It could be utterly wonderful, but that would kind of mean we'd have to be like a different species, like, nicer or something, So all will muddle through, I suppose, but this thing about empowerment, it'll happen by default, it'll happen by accident, I think. It won't, certainly not by design. There's no money in it.
The government suspended the pound from the European monetary system tonight after failing to stop it falling through the floor of the exchange rate mechanism. The Chancellor will not resign, says Downing Street. The pound is now floating free and falling fast on the foreign exchanges.
Whatever it takes.
Does that mean it's an open book and you're prepared to put money in it on and on and on?
Of course.
Was on top of it. God was on top of it.
Black Wednesday, the day the currency dealers sent the pound into a seemingly terminal spin, and the Bank of England spent and lost a fortune trying to defend it. But some made money while Britain lost. George Soros amassed around $1 billion that day, speculating on the pound.
Above all, society is skeptical nowadays. Ideas of death and catastrophe from the sky belong to ancient times, before the age of science, when superstition made people petrified of the heavens.
The pound is now floating free and falling fast on the foreign exchanges.
The way in which international capital now dictates to governments what they can do. The International Monetary Fund tells the government, if you don't cut your health and educational expenditure, we'll destroy the value of your currency. And if democracy is ever destroyed in Britain, it won't be some blood-stained revolution. It'll be because that power that we struggled very hard to acquire through the ballot box has been taken away from us, and we are spectators of our fate. And I don't think that will be acceptable. But at the moment, people may not be fully aware of what's happening.
In the 60s, we allowed technology to happen to us passively. We accepted the story that we were told, that this is what technology was going to do for us, and we just blindly accepted it and followed it. We must make sure that we control technology, not that technology controls us, and it's up to us to make sure that doesn't happen.
You probably know my 5 democratic questions. If you meet a powerful person, it might have been Hitler or Stalin or Robert Maxwell or Jacques Delors. You ask them 5 questions. What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you? Now that democratic question, how can we get rid of you, is the only way you can get any control over the people who govern you. And that applies if the power they have over you is scientific, political, economic, industrial, or in terms of the control of your mind. Those are the crucial questions raised by science. Democratic control of the enormous knowledge now at the disposal of the human race.